I welcome everybody. I am pleased to be joined today by Dan Burke, the CEO of LifeWorks and the Arc of South Norfolk. Dan, appreciate the time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for asking me, Eric. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, so both of the agencies that you run are both human service agencies, which obviously has been dramatically impacted and affected by COVID-19. Give us a little bit of the scenery as to what's going on, what you've seen, some of the things that you guys have had to do.
So it's been, I think, is obvious for many people, an enormous impact across the platforms of both our organizations. Our organizations work sort of hand in glove. They don't do the same services. Each does a certain unique set of services. So on a high level, we've closed our day programs out like all the other organizations in the state. We closed our day programs with 1 day's notice. We basically had to pivot our entire organization, and human service agencies don't have a history of doing that very quickly sometimes, right. And we've had to do that very quickly. All of our individualized services, our family supports, our family autism center, our individual home supports for people who live in their own apartments, our adult foster care, adult family care programs that are really one-on-one and small group things and with families, all had to evolve to telehealth, phone call check-ins, emergency stop-bys, drop-offs, virtual supports of every level, because going into people's homes and meeting with people individually here in the office doesn't happen anymore. So those things were important. And on the flip side, our residential services became 24-hour life care support models. They had to take on the anxiety of the entire organization. And the largest thing we did is we then had to pivot. What do we do for our employees? Between our two organizations, we have over 400 employees. And our goal was to try to provide as much employment for as many people as possible. And so we moved about 75 employees from our 3 different day program models to work in our residences. And we did that with about 72 hours notice. And they literally,
that's quick.
We announced on Monday, the 16th of March. On St. Patrick's Day, we met with everybody, found out where they want to work and where they, what's close to their house and that type of thing. And we took people from the Arc of South Norfolk, which is a separate legal organization, and basically an employee leasing model, and moved them over to work for LifeWorks. And people from LifeWorks day programs go to houses, and had them start on Wednesday and Thursday. And that was challenging enough, but then you're supporting the anxieties of all of our staff and the people we serve, because in those first few weeks, this was such an unknown factor. Nobody knew how you were going to get it. It was just coming upon us very quickly. So you're trying to get coverage and support people and keep people working, and most importantly, support the people we serve, and yet managing everybody's anxieties and our own anxieties. And so we're very fortunate we have a tremendous team and pulled it off.
So that's just a lot of complexity to deal with, especially because you have 2 organizations, and so what were some of the challenges that you personally had throughout the process when you think back, because having interviewed some other leaders and just spoken to some clients, each of them has had their own hurdles and own obstacles to get over, because again, this is unprecedented, but it's probably also one of the most pivotal times for leaders that have stepped up to really own the organization. What have been some of the personal challenges or things that you've had to overcome?
Outside of the fact that we needed about 30 hours in a day instead of 24, which was, I think the personal things for everybody has been, first and foremost, for all of our employees, including from me on down, is how do you manage your own personal anxieties and knowledge and life experiences with COVID, and how you're supporting your own families as employees, and yet knowing that we had this enormous responsibility to support all these folks with disabilities who couldn't understand it, whose lives had to change in a moment, who had to understand that the personal contact we might have, that I guess I best explain it by what happens each and every day. Very often our house staff arrive for work and somebody lives there. They come to the house, they greet them, they give them a half a hug, they give them a high five, they're shaking hands, they're sitting down side by side reading a book, they're explaining the news, they're sitting together, and all of that with the ideas of social distancing had to end, those interpersonal contacts. and for people with disabilities who have a hard time understanding that, that was really hard for our staff and really hard for all of us. So getting people through that, I think, helping people get through the anxieties. And when we did have people positive, how to deal with that, how to keep people safe. That at the end of the day, I think all of the executives will say that we started every day with how do we keep people safe. And, we did phone calls at night and asking people to do different jobs. I think probably the most personally challenging was going to people and trying to evolve them and move them into different jobs and to keep them working. And I'm proud that we did so much of that. And then we had, like anything else, the personal challenge of asking people to go above and beyond. That the idea when you have so much going, weekends were just another day. I think that all of our senior leadership and all of our, right down to our house managers, people working 7 days a week. There was no taking time off on the weekends and that stuff, because then that was everybody's life, and continues to be in some cases, but it's getting better. So
yeah, that's a lot to manage, especially for the staff, managing burnout and the fatigue that they have.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece is, as this has evolved as a leader, being aware of people's mental health challenges. We started about 3 weeks into this, and all of our calls emphasizing to our staff to be paying attention to the mental health needs of their staff. We have a counseling center here that supports people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, with a whole bunch of licensed social workers and master's level clinicians. And so we've put all of them on call that we would pay privately for any staff that needed supports, for example. Trying to make it available that if people needed some personal supports, and also working with our other benefits folks. And we've had a number of people who've sought that support. And I'm glad we were able to provide that, because this is a difficult time.
And so as we, I've seen a lot of leaders, coming out of, for the past several months, kind of crisis management, crisis leadership mode. And now, getting out of that fog and looking over the horizon saying, okay, well, wow, I got to do something, and that something could be, obviously tomorrow or the next few months or even the next 12 months. Where do you see, given that the business models have changed, where do you see opportunity in this? What do you think, the future is going to look like?
So I've always, when we get into crises, as from my leadership role, I've always keep in the back of my head a phrase that I heard Bob Kraft utter more than 20 years ago, that in every crisis there's an opportunity. And sometimes that's the way you keep your spirits up. You have to look for that opportunity. You have to look for that way to make things better. Because if you get just caught up in thinking about the crisis, you can't look beyond. And so I think we've had some great successes with the switch to virtual services. Yeah. Certainly our mental health counseling clinic and their ability to do telehealth, our ability to provide telehealth supports for families that are involved in our day programs, our ability to really, in a very short period of time, with limited budgets up until now, in managing the ability to embrace Zoom technology and Microsoft Teams and other things, to allow people to participate and us to support families and individuals at home through those things as an ancillary support, I think are great. I think that the opportunity going forward over the next 6 to 12 months is hybrid programming. People will come to our day programs. They will participate in our social rec programs. They will participate in our support groups, whether they're families and other people. And hopefully in an ideal world, they're going to be able to participate 2 ways. They'll be able to come in some days, and they'll be able to participate virtually some days. I think that's an exciting option. The telehealth options for the folks that we serve that live at home, especially people with significant physical disabilities, to be able to get psychological and psychiatric supports and their medical supports, so they don't have to troop into Boston to go see somebody, that these doctors are now equipped to see our folks through telemedicine, and those things can increase their ability to get care sooner, to get care more directly, and to manage it with our staff better. So I think that there are real exciting opportunities to go forward. I think from an operational standpoint, we've put in place a number of things that really are going to help us. We centralized inventory, centralized purchasing, management of supplies and learning how to better supply all of our folks, learning how to think further ahead. Right prior to this call, I just finished a meeting around centralized purchasing, and we would be ordering items 2 weeks out before this started on our best day. Now our goal as an organization is to have 2 months of the personal protective equipment on hand at any one time. Those kind of things. So we're never in this risk situation again, that we have the supplies, that we have what we need.
And do you think the state is excited about or interested in innovation around the use of technology, assistive supports like that?
I think there's a part of them that is, and I think there's a part of them that thinks it's a way to save money.
Okay.
Honestly, I do. If we could think about it as a way to improve our services and stay level and meet our needs, I think that would be great. I think the problem for the state right now is we're at the end of a fiscal year and they have a hard time thinking past July 1st. Like we're thinking about July, August, and September, and they're trying to get through the end of the fiscal year because they don't have a budget and there's no budget in sight. And they have a hard time not thinking beyond one budget year to the next budget year. And that's not a criticism. That's just the nature of municipal government as its whole. So I know that, for example, in DDS, the Commissioner Jane Ryder has a very much of a technology initiative. She's continuing to move some of her staff around into leading that technology initiative.
That's great.
I think that they're trying to make their staff more virtual and their staff more available, which is great. I think they've done some exciting things. I hope they keep going around virtual trainings, licensing, some flexibility around online classes for some of the trainings, because at the end of the day, the amount of time people would take outside of programs for these trainings, like first aid and CPR renewals and some of these other things, if they can all be done virtually, we can be far more effective and far more efficient. Because at the end of the day, right now, we've never had more staff work in our residences. But when I have to reopen my day programs, the staffing crisis is going to come back to us.
Yeah.
And, one of the challenges, you asked me earlier about challenges, my predecessor, Bill Abel, and I had a conversation about 6 weeks ago or so about the difference between 1986 and 2007 for staffing crises and now, right before COVID hit. And what worries me is that in those times, when the stock market crashed in 1987, and when the stock market crashed in 2008, people came running back to the security and safety of our organizations and to our jobs, because our jobs they might not be paying well, but they were here. Now, the COVID scare worries me for people wanting to do that personal care and wanting to be hands-on, because it's put another dilemma into the situation.
So with all the financial uncertainty that you have, like from the state, I mean, they're just getting kind of their ducks in a row around maybe their budgeting process. So that, that would have been something you would have had answers on.
Absolutely.
And knowing that most nonprofits in the human services sector are kind of, their fiscal year starts July 1, what do you do? I mean, do you take it month by month? I mean, how do you prepare for that?
So our plan here for our organization is to do a 3-month budget for our boards and for our lenders. And then as things move forward, and have a rough 1-year budget, and then review in September and true it up to where we think our funding is by then. I'm thinking that by then there'll be a budget. By then we'll have an idea, or and because there's some rumblings that the state could pass a budget with the expectation that they'll do 9 seat cuts in October once the federal, whether there's federal reimbursement for the state's issues with federal bailout of the state.
They're shortfalls.
So there's some talk that might happen.
Okay.
So I think we'll do a 3-month budget that'll be based on what we know for the next 3 months, with some guests going forward. I think that's our plan right now.
Okay. So when you look beyond the next 3 months, like where do you see the future over the next 1 to 2 years in terms of, the need to focus, or things that that are priorities for you?
Very, very challenging for the next year. I'm hoping 2 years out they're better, but very challenging for the next year. I think that residential services, which are a good portion of what we do, will remain there because people are living there and they're being funded and they know they'll have to fund them. But the role of day services, we do employment services, we do community-based day services called Life Enhancement, and we do our day habilitation programs under the ARC. I think people are going to be concerned about coming to a congregate setting like that. I think, we'll be able to get people back to work, but how we do that, I think that's very concerning. How we're going to staff up. I think one of we talk about the opportunity. The opportunity will be that we'll be talking with our staff about. A lot of staff done a great job of going to work in these houses. I think when we open our day programs, staff will be working split schedules. They'll be working 3 days here and 2 days there, that type of thing. I mean, I guess I'm most proud of the fact. First of all, I'm most proud of the fact that our staff have been the absolute heroes. The absolute heroes. Nothing can motivate me more for the rest of my career than what staff have done in these last 2 months. They have put their own personal concerns aside to care for people at a very high level. And we're so appreciative about that. And it's so motivating to have that happen. We're very lucky.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
So I think that's what will carry us forward. It's going to be that spirit that will carry us forward, that spirit of working together. Because we're going to need people to be flexible. It's really getting our everybody to be flexible, and hopefully our funding sources will remain flexible. That will allow us to at least stay whole, as the phrase always goes.
Sure.
It's unfortunate because the collaboration between nonprofit, the trade organizations in our business, and the state had reached some great successes going forward in discussions this year. And of course, no one could have seen this coming.
Yeah, COVID changed everybody's agenda pretty quick.
Absolutely. So,
all right.
I'm just glad you interviewed me today after I got my haircut.
I had the courage enough to let my 16-year-old cut mine last weekend.
Brave man.
Yes, it took a lot. So when you look at the future, there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously, about what you need to do, where you need to go, and even how to plan for that. What thoughts, advice would you give to other nonprofit CEOs, whether they're in health, human services, whatever, that are kind of emerging from the fog now and thinking about the future?
I think the first thing is what you just said. You have to be thinking a year down the road. You have to be thinking a year and 2 years down the road. And if you have a strategic plan in place, don't go away from that. Don't change what you might have as 3 to 5 year goals because of the short-term crisis. We have to work through it, and we'll adjust. We're gonna, what happens in a year might force us to adjust those things, but don't make judgments based on what we're in this crisis. I hope to think that when COVID gets under control with, my own hope, of course, like a lot of people, is when we have a vaccine and a treatment. But, when we talk about the economy in this country, people always say the economy come back because the underlying underpinnings of the economy is still strong when
Right.
the world comes back.
Yeah.
I think we have to hope that the underpinnings of the human services system is strong, and the underpinnings of the commitment of our funding sources and our governor and our legislature, which were there and heading there in January and February this year, are strong. And that when we get through the next year or so, that those underpinnings will come back. The revenue will come back, the business will come back, and hopefully those underpinnings will be there. And we have to try, and that's hard to do when we're trying to pay the bills every 2 weeks.
Sure.
We're working through, everybody's trying to figure out where their services are at and what they can do. So that's probably my one advice for people is to try to stay looking down the road. And that's hard when we're the CEO of companies where our agencies are having a hard time. I'm trying to schedule staff. They're trying to schedule staff for 4 weeks, and we're trying to think longer term. So that would be my one piece of advice. The other piece of advice is that when you're having a hard time in terms of being challenged by this, we have one blessing in human services that people in other businesses don't. When we're having a hard time, I go visit the folks that we serve. I can see the folks we serve, and they motivate you all the time. So you take some time to either say hello or get on a Zoom call with one of our residences, or see some of the folks. for
Helps,
me,
helps to ground you, right?
it's
Let you know
completely
it's
grounded.
important.
I took my first day off last Friday going to Memorial Day since March 9th, literally first day off. And I was in my front yard, had just finished doing some yard work about 5 o'clock with a glass of water. And my phone rings, and it was my office phone that was forwarded to my cell phone. And I answered, and it was a person we serve in Ardejo. And she called, and she said, Dan, I just wanted to see how you're doing. I wanted to see how your family is. And I
That's
thought,
amazing.
what can make you feel better about what we do? Like here, where all these people are worried about these guys, and she's calling me. And so that we're lucky in that regard. And so it grounds us, it motivates us, because it's as we said, we've said multiple times, it's a challenging time, but those things are out there. So.
Well, I mean, I know you mentioned a few, really great stories and bright spots, but, when you look over the last few months, are there any other kind of bright spots or, fun things that stand out?
Outside of our staff, the staff have been, of course, great, and our families have been great. I have to pay tribute to the families of the people we serve. They've been great. I guess the bright spot for our organization in terms of keeping our line down the road is that we launched in November the building of the most intensive residential supports program we're ever going to have. Will be the most intensive medical supports program in the state for people with disabilities, for 5 people who get tremendous nursing. They live home with older parents that are aging. They need some very intensive supports. And we broke ground in January, and they were pouring foundations then and starting to build. And then, of course, COVID hit. And somehow we have kept this thing moving. And we have kept this thing moving through many hoops and hurdles and getting around challenges and working with utility companies and contractors and the town and all of our partners in this project. And the house is going to open on June 24th.
Congratulations.
Certificate of occupancy next week. And my final quote of that is last week we took the families through for their first visit when the house was done, pretty much done. And one of the mothers said to me, Dan, I never, ever envisioned I'd be picking out furniture for my son to move into his home, because I never envisioned my son would live past the age of 25. And now at 38, my son will be moving into his own home.
That's amazing.
And
that's gonna bring all kinds of good stuff to your life, right? Just that comment alone.
And so when we talk about a bright spot for all of our staff and for everybody, because this is a group of people, and so many of our colleagues have those kind of stories.
Yeah.
We've had sadness here. We've lost people, and good friends and people that we serve, not directly through COVID, but during the COVID process. And we lost a couple through COVID, and that's incredibly challenging. And your heart breaks for people who haven't been able to say goodbye the way that we hope to. But the organization has carried on for 65 years because we're moving to the next vision of how our services evolve. And so this is exciting that we're going to be opening that house.
That's a beautiful story. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity and the great discussion. This has been great.
Well, thank you for asking me. I appreciate it, and I wish good luck to anybody who's watching this. And as I finish all my conversations with every clerk and cashier and friend I know, stay healthy. That's what we hope for everyone. Stay healthy.
Awesome. Well, if you want to find out more about Dan's organizations that he is the leader of, please see the links below. As always, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can see more discussions with great leaders like Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.